So just another flow along surface demo which may be useful. I was experimenting a bit with trying to apply kind of a woven basket weave like pattern to the surface, but I'm realizing that it's going to skew the spacing, it's going to skew the size of the woven parts, and that's not exactly how I think things are going to be constructed for that group. But in any case, just another quick demo because it kind of does reveal how the density of pattern will kind of work its way around a full surface or a partial surface, and maybe we can just take a quick look at that. So anyway, flow along surface here is quite a useful command to kind of prototype out, placing objects along the surface um, from a flat pattern. The objects that we're going to flow is this. I already kind of drew out this 2D pattern here, and you can see that there's a surface that's below it, a flat surface. We do need that as a reference. So we'll go ahead and select that. First of all, the stuff we're going to flow, and then it's going to ask you for a base surface. There's a few options in here that you should pay attention to. In this case, this is what we're going to need to use. So we're going to make a copy. The rigid, I guess, is going to have to be no here. We're going to have to kind of morph these lines over the top, and the rest we can leave as default. Oops. What it was asking us to do is select the edge near a corner. So let's pay attention to that, because if you don't, it may actually kind of rotate or kind of do something a little bit unexpected on as a result. So I'm going to select a corner that I know that I can find on this one. So try to imagine this flat surface kind of rolling up, to form this one over here. We know that that corner, if it's rolled upward, would kind of turn into this corner here, right? So I'm going to select that really close to the corner there. And then it's going to automatically ask us for the target surface near a matching corner. And the matching corner is going to be what we decided to be here. And that will immediately apply that pattern in its entirety to the extent of that surface. Now you can see there's some pretty drastic skewing that's going on here, and it could be that we have perhaps too wide of a pattern in 2D, and as it's kind of flowing over this one here, this half surface here, it's kind of squeezing it. So you can experiment, especially with potentially even with chord history on maybe, or even just trying a few different options. You could redraw this pattern at a thinner, to a thinner scope, maybe even changing the density, making it longer, shorter, higher, less density, more density. You can play around with, and then also just its extents, so we can trim all this down, have another pattern to try, and see if it'll change the proportions. As a way to demonstrate that, let's instead apply the same pattern to this overall, instead of the whole surface here. So let's take a look at that option, kind of demonstrate how the same pattern will actually be appear differently on that surface. Right, so that you can see now that it's kind of being stretched across the entirety of that surface, and it has a more of a proportional appearance. It's still obviously going to skew because the nature of this surface is doubly curved, and we're applying something 2D to it. So spacings will change, things will have to morph, and having straight lines going across this curved surface isn't possible using this process. That would be a geodesic line, and you have to define those differently. But in any case, again, this might be actually more of a complex form than what the basket weaving team is trying to attempt. So potentially this process could be a decent approximation for the drawing, although a rendered view, which has already been attempted to apply a texture, basically texture mapping of the woven kind of pattern directly to the surface itself, is also an effective way of doing that. You can just sort of show, in the drawing that that's the assembly basically of the skin, just through the image instead of line work. But if you want to experiment with line work, flow along may be a way to get you at least halfway there or partially there. And if we can come up with any other ideas, we can follow up. One of the hard parts also, remember, is that it's a diagrid pattern. If the weave is actually in an orthogonal pattern, we may be able to actually just rebuild the surface to a really dense set of isocurves, and then extract that wireframe and work with it. For example, I'll just take this over here and either rebuild it, or sometimes you can just increase the isocurve density here to just get a sense of it. you know, something like that. We may be able to just work with this. Because that's gonna, I mean, yeah, the lines going in this direction are going to be wavy, right? But as a drawing, it may be good enough just to kind of at least put out the intent that this is a kind of a basket weave. If you have to do some over and unders, you can also do that by trimming out, you know, every other line or something in both directions to try to make it look truly woven. But if it's a dense, you know, if it's a tightly woven basket weave, it'll more or less look like this, but you just may have to define the edges so that it'll appear a little bit more like a weave. But in any case, you could also explore just using a dense isocurve pattern if the weave is more or less orthogonal to the bottom of the bow like this, right? So that it's more or less in this direction. If it's a diagrid, it's slightly more challenging. Yeah, I'm going to rebuild this actually to increase the number in one direction. I'm going to turn this to 20 here. Let's see, I just want to try something. That looks a little more square. Oh, now I got to change my density. So remember that the isocurve density here in the properties is not actually a rebuild. It's just showing you more lines, but you can actually extract that as well. But in this case, the rebuild is better because it gives us some more control over the, you know, how many are in each direction, and that gives me something that's a little bit more square, like this one here that I had before. Okay, anyway, just a couple of random ideas about using flow along to potentially produce a kind of a diagrid, kind of woven pattern, or even just any diagrid over the course of this surface, if you're okay with it kind of morphing to match the target surface geometry.